Hello, restless wanderers and history's dreamers. I'm Dr. Weird, your guide through the twilight of empires and the echoes they leave behind. Tonight, we step softly into the crumbling streets of an empire once unparalleled, Rome, as we trace its final sunset. Close your eyes and let the distant toll of a lone bell carry you back through marble forums, now silent, aqueducts choked with ivy, and palace halls haunted by vanished legions. What happens when the heartbeat of a world, pulsing with conquest, art, and law, slows to a whisper? What secrets lie hidden in the moss-grown stones and fluttering parchments of a civilization on its last breath? Let these questions drift through your mind as you sink deeper into your pillow, each exhale releasing the weight of modern worries. So tonight, drift with me into Rome's final twilight, where ruins speak and memories linger, and discover how an empire's end can echo across the ages. Imagine two infants, abandoned on the riverbank, cradled by a she-wolf's gentle gaze beneath moonlit hills. Could a city born from such legend reshape the destiny of the world? Envision soft mist curling around the 7 hills as a shepherd's lantern winks in the darkness. Before Rome's marble columns and Senate debates, Latium's rolling landscape harbored simple communities bound by clan and custom. Into this primordial tapestry stepped Aeneas, survivor of Troy's ashes, whose son Ascanius founded Alba Longa. Generations later, rival brothers Numitor and Amulius vied for its throne, setting fate in motion. When Amulius consigned Rhea Silvia to the Vestal Order, divine currents stirred. Mars, god of war, visited her in sacred secrecy, and from their union came twin heirs, Romulus and Remus. In that primal era, education and law intertwined with ritual. Young patricians, heirs to Rome's leading families, gathered in the regal hall where Etruscan haruspices chanted Jupiter's name. Each invocation was a lesson, words woven with power, binding speaker and listener alike. Boys learned the earliest laws by heart. No written code yet existed beyond faded wooden tablets. Instead, solemn oaths administered under the open sky held weight equal to any statute. By adulthood, these youth had witnessed the comitia curiata, assemblies of clan elder representatives, where debate and consensus nurtured a nascent civic identity. Art and architecture arose from necessity and devotion. First came reed-thatched cottages perched on Palatine slopes. Soon, crude stone foundations replaced unstable timber. Under King Numa Pompilius, artisans molded terracotta votives of Mars and Juno for home shrines, small tokens of gratitude and supplication. Tullus Hostilius ordered the laying of ashlar blocks to outline the future Forum Romanum, shaping a public square destined for law courts and marketplaces. Each newly set stone whispered promise, permanence, order, and the presence of gods within mortal walls. Society coalesced around gentes, extended kinship groups claiming divine ancestry, dividing Romans into patricians, guardians of ritual and land, and plebeians who toiled the fields. Twice yearly, Feria united these classes. At the harvest's close, torchlit processions to Ceres's altar ensured abundant grain. During the Lupercalia, each February, half-naked youths ran ritual circuits, striking bystanders with goatskin thongs to promote health and fertility. Markets crackled at dawn. Etruscan traders bartered bronze cauldrons. Latin farmers traded salted fish, voices rising in bargaining songs under a sky yet unscarred by empire. Amid ceremony's hum, Romulus plowed the first pomerium, the city's sacred boundary, its furrows traced by red-tipped plowshare. Remus, mocking the fledgling city's walls, leapt the line. Angered, Romulus struck him down, uttering the Republic's first law. He who crosses these walls shall die. In that instant, myth and jurisprudence entwined. A single act of violence birthed order. Yet Romans honored Remus's memory with annual commemorations, acknowledging that Rome's birth bore sacrifice as much as foundation. If Rome's stones were consecrated in wolf-sung legend and crimson sacrifice, what hidden echoes still tremble beneath her streets? Under Numa's reign, martial zeal gave way to harmonious ritual. In moonlit groves, he consulted the nymph Egeria to craft Rome's first 12-month calendar, dividing days into fasti, permitted for public business, and nefasti, reserved for divine observance. He built the Temple of Janus, its doors closing only in times of lasting peace. Priestly colleges multiplied, the Salii, leaping shield-bearers of Mars, the Pontiffs, custodians of ritual precision, the Vestals, 6 virgins tending Vesta's eternal flame. Through these institutions, Numa forged balance between mortal will and sacred command. Engineering strides soon followed. Tullus carved the Cloaca Maxima through marshy floodplain, draining stagnant waters into the Tiber and reclaiming land for temples and roads. A wooden pons sublicius spanned the river, linking Palatine and Capitoline hills, forging unity and enabling commerce. Early pathways, via Palatina, bore the tread of merchants and patricians alike, their dust rising in silent heralds of future highways stretching to distant provinces. Yet power's arc bent toward tyranny under Tarquin the Proud. His autocratic rule, marked by splendid quarries and massive walls, bred resentment. The turning point came when Tarquin's son, Sextus, violated noble Lucretia. In the stillness of night, her tragedy ignited revolt. Patricians and plebeians stormed the royal palace, overthrew the Tarquin line, and cast the last king into exile. With dawn's first light, monarchy fell. Rome proclaimed the Res Publica, Res Publica che Romana, the public affair of Roman citizens. When tyranny's yoke shattered and king's crown scattered, could law and shared governance chart a new destiny? Beneath the newly established consular system, magistrates replaced monarchs, annually elected from patrician ranks, but accountable to the people's assemblies. Written legal codes, the 12 tables, emerged, inscribed on bronze and displayed in the forum, accessible to all. Civic institutions blossomed. Quaestors managed state treasury, aediles oversaw markets and public works, praetors presided over justice. In that crucible of innovation, Rome transitioned from mythic monarchy to dynamic republic, embracing equality before law as the bedrock of society. Now, as you exhale, let the weight of that ancient promise settle around you. A city born of legend, tempered by sacrifice, upheld by law and ritual, poised on the brink of expansion that would one day encompass the known world. Ahead lies the story of Rome's rise beyond her hills, of legions and laws, of conflict and concord, of power forged in battle and tempered in assembly. Drift into that next chapter, guided by history's forge and the Republic's unwavering compass. Picture Rome's first consuls standing beneath a rosy dawn, their togas whispering in the chill air. Could a city freed from kings embrace an expansion that would reshape the Mediterranean? As that vision settles, imagine the young Republic of Rome in 509 BC, freshly rid of Tarquinian tyranny. The royal purple gave way to the white togas of 2 annually elected consuls, and for the first time, assemblies of patricians and plebeians, landowners and craftsmen alike, debated war, peace, and policy. No single monarch now commanded the legions. Instead, each citizen's vote in the comitia carried weight, forging a balance between privilege and popular will. Early on, Rome's neighbors watched with wary curiosity. Etruscan city-states to the north still practiced arcane rituals in temple courtyards. Latin hill tribes clustered around granite fortresses beneath flickering watchfires. The Sabines beyond the Tiber upheld rites older than any Roman memory. Yet Rome's citizen soldiers mustered at the city gates. Yeoman landholders sworn to defend hearth and home, their leather-strapped sandals gripping uneven cobbles, bronze shields gleaming like trapped sunlight. Mercy shone, clementia, to a defeated foe often turned enemies into allies, swelling Rome's ranks with grateful new recruits. On the Campus Martius, the Comitia Centuriata, convened under open skies. Young men, future legionaries, observed heated debates on grain distribution and militia levies, absorbing the art of persuasion from retired officers who drilled them in rhetoric's measured cadence. Take a slow breath in and let the lessons of discipline and debate steep into your mind, for these youths would soon command cohorts in battle, each oath they swore echoing in the forum's marble heart. Within the city's still evolving walls, transformation took root in brick and stone. Crumbling reed thatch huts gave way to compact domus with frescoed atria. Under Edel's watchful eyes, narrow lanes were paved with volcanic slabs, and rainwater coursed through extended drains of the Cloaca Maxima. The Forum Romanum, once a muddy crossroads, was leveled and hemmed by porticos, each pillar carved with dedications to Jupiter and Janus. Markets thrived at dawn. Merchants hawked Apennine olive oil and amphorae. Etruscan potters displayed bronze cauldrons, and legal advocates, robed in white-hemmed togas, explained newly minted Senate decrees to eager listeners. Daily life brimmed with ritual. Dawn found the Pontifex Maximus interpreting thunderclaps and bird calls for omens as farmers loaded wagons of wheat for the market. Midday, Curule Aedilus inspected stalls for fairness and sanitation. In courtyard atria, families gathered. Women wove reed baskets, elders recounted ancestral legends, children chased chickens under stone archways. Festivals punctuated the year. The Aquiria drew thunderous crowds for horse races to honor Mars. The Floralia transformed streets into living garlands as Romans danced beneath petals, renewing communal bonds in vibrant color and song. Religion wove through every decision. Vestal virgins guarded Vesta's eternal flame, its soft glow symbolizing hearth and home. The Temple of Janus swung its doors open in times of conflict and closed in fleeting peace, each click heard like a heartbeat across the city. Flamens, priests devoted to single gods, performed daily sacrifices of bull or sheep on open-air altars. No harvest was sown, no legion dispatched, without first securing divine approval. Rome's earliest military trials tested this structure. In 496 BC, Volscian warbands surged over the hills, shields catching the gray light of dawn. Legionaries formed shield wall wedges on a narrow valley floor, spears locked in interlaced defense. Arrows darkened the air, the clash of bronze rang through the mist. Then lightning, a bolt from Jupiter himself, cleaved a nearby oak, splintering enemy ranks and shattering their resolve. Romans pressed forward, driving Volscians back to marshland's edge in a victory that became legend and emboldened the Republic's martial spirit. Decades later, at Lake Regillus, Latin forces and exiled King Tarquin rallied against their former subjects. Cavalry thundered through knee-deep reeds, hooves drumming like tribal drums. Swords sang death songs as infantry pressed flanks. In the twilight's haze, cavalry commander Aulus Postumius vowed victory to Castor and Pollux, and eyewitnesses swore they glimpsed twin horsemen leading the charge. Latin lines collapsed beneath that spectral assault. Survivors fled across boggy ground, clamoring for safety. A triumphal parade wound through the newly paved Forum, and a temple to the divine twins rose on Capitoline Heights, a permanent reminder that gods and mortals walked Rome's streets side by side. By the mid-4th century BC, Rome's dominion spanned Italy, but its greatest test lay in the Apennines. The Samnite Wars demanded tactical innovation. Rigid phalanxes gave way to manipular formations, small, flexible units moving independently in rugged terrain. Surveyors laid out the first miles of the Via Appia with rods and plumb lines, guiding laborers who sank wooden pilings into swamps and heaved boulders to carve an artery linking Rome to Capua. Each milepost, inscribed with distance markers, echoed the city's relentless ambition to bind provinces by road and right. At each conquered outpost, Venusia, Luceria, Bovianum, Roman priests consecrated altars to Juno Regina and Minerva, forging divine bonds with local communities. Colonists, armed with plots of fertile land, sowed grain and tended vines under the gods' favor. These frontier towns grew into hubs of Roman law and custom. Magistrates adjudicated disputes under open skies, public squares offered asylum to refugees, and Latin taught by itinerant grammarians became the lingua franca of roads and markets. Inside Rome, spoils of conquest enriched both state and citizen. Quaestors managed a treasury bulging with gold and silver melted from Samnite armor. Patricians funded basilicas crowned with ancestral busts, while plebeian politicians used their share to sponsor public games. The cursus honorum, Rome's ladder of offices, offered ambitious men of humble birth a path to the Senate's marble chambers. By swearing solemn oaths before Jupiter's statue, they bound themselves to uphold law and tradition, cementing the Republic's ideals. Education blossomed through Hellenistic influence. Greek tutors from Naples taught geometry and astronomy in shaded stoas. Latin orators studied Greek rhetoric, mastering gestures and cadence that swayed assemblies. Wealthy patrons amassed scrolls of Homer, Pindar, and Archimedes in private libraries. Jurists compiled legal precedents, blending Roman custom with concepts of equity. Thus, the Republic forged leaders prepared to govern not only Italy, but future provinces from Gaul to Asia. From shepherd fires on Palatine slopes to Greek scrolls in Roman hands, the Republic wove unity through roads, rights, and relentless will. By 264 BC, Italy lay under Roman sway, and the First Punic War with Carthage beckoned, a crucible that would test the Republic's mettle on land and sea. Now, as Rome's legions prepare to cross salt seas and face a rival power etched in maritime legend, the next chapter of conflict and innovation awaits. Imagine the roar of warships tightening their lines, oars flashing like spears at dawn. What ancient rivalry forged Rome's steel resolve and Carthage's indomitable sea power into a crucible of empire? In the year 264 BC, the Republic's eyes turned beyond Italy's hills toward distant shores. Sicily, jewel of the Mediterranean, lay contested between Mamertine mercenaries and the Phoenician city of Carthage. Rome, newly confident from Samnite victories, answered a plea for aid, dispatching legions across the Strait of Messina. Thus began the First Punic War, a 30-year saga of sweat, steel, and saltwater that would redefine naval warfare and test Rome's endurance. The momentous decision to build a fleet marked Rome's first great leap. No longer merely masters of land, Roman engineers studied Carthaginian quincremes, reversing their design in clay and wood. On the sheltered banks of the Tiber, shipwrights hammered pine and fir into galleys, warships 90 feet long, each fitted with bronze rostrums at the prow. Sailors, long accustomed to farming and militia drills, adapted to quarterdeck commands, learning rigging and curved oar strokes in the early morning mists. Instructors, veteran Carthaginian defectors, taught them to navigate by sun and star, to coordinate 15 banks of oarsmen with drumbeat precision. In Rome's sprawling atria, young patricians and plebeians gathered under vaulted ceilings, tracing carved diagrams of the new warships in charcoal. Tutors explained trireme trigonometry and wind patterns in the Tyrrhenian Sea, blending military engineering with classic Greek geometry. Courts debated the financial strain of fleet construction. The Senate approved taxes on land and goods, and wealthy equestrians bankrolled shipyards in return for future booty. Thus, education and civic duty sealed their pact. Knowledge forged ironclad alliances between citizen and state, scholar and soldier. As Rome's nascent navy launched on gentle currents, Carthage's seasoned fleet lay in wait. Across bright blue waves, purple-robed magistrates watched from harbor walls, their arms raised in silent salute to Baal Hammon and Tanit. Before every departure, priests from the Temple of Eshmun conducted solemn rites. Bulls were led through salt-sprinkled gates, and libations poured onto carved altars as incense curled into the Sicilian sky. Fleet commanders offered vows that if victory came, they would dedicate captured spoils to the gods, inscribing names on temple walls in votive marble. The first great clash erupted off Mylae in 260 BC. Roman ships, clumsy but numerous, closed on Carthaginian triremes whose veteran crews swept through waves with practiced ease. Then Rome unleashed its secret weapon. The corvus, a boarding bridge with iron spike, dropped onto enemy decks, turning sea battles into land skirmishes. Legionaries, shield and gladius armed, stormed across the vortex of creaking timbers, transforming ships into floating phalanxes. Screams and clashing metal rang under gull-squawked skies, and by dusk, Carthage conceded defeat. A triumphal procession wound through Rome's widened forum, adorned with captured bronze shields and upturned Carthaginian standards, reminding citizens that the Republic's stride now spanned land and sea. If oared bridges could turn waters to battlefields, what deeper currents of rivalry propelled Rome and Carthage toward destiny's shore? The Second Punic War ignited 2 decades later when Hannibal Barca, son of Hamilcar, emerged from Iberia's hills with an army of tens of thousands and war elephants tearing through Gallic tribes. His crossing of the Alps in winter, grueling, epic, unprecedented, etched itself into memory. Columns of salted infantry trudged over snow-choked passes, each man's face a mask of ice and determination. Elephants, pachyderm icons of fear, slipped on treacherous slopes, their trumpets echoing across glacial canyons. Romans trembled at the news. An army, forged by desert winds and mountain snows, now threatened Italy's heartland. Within city walls, panic met resolve. Senate sessions extended into candlelit nights as strategists debated strategy. Tutors rushed military scrolls into atriums, teaching young nobles about Hannibal's tactics. Families gathered in courtyard atria, exchanging rumors. At Lake Trasimene, Carthaginian ambush under flickering olive groves had cut down Roman legions. At Cannae, 2 consular armies were encircled and annihilated, 70,000 soldiers lost in a single, devastating day. Mothers wept for absent sons, orators exhorted citizen militias to resist despair and buoy civic spirit. Yet Rome refused submission. Consul Fabius Maximus won the name Cunctator, the Delayer, by shadowing Hannibal's movements, avoiding pitched battle, and starving his forces through scorched earth tactics. Farms were burned to deny forage, supply lines severed under Cimmerian nights. Fabius's strategy bred controversy, calls of cowardice from hawkish senators, but preserved the Republic's coffers and troops. His cautious approach tempered youthful zeal, teaching students in public porticos that prudence could rival boldness and that victory sometimes required patience over valor. Amid this turmoil, cultural life in Rome found unexpected flourish. Elite patronage funded dramatists who staged plays on makeshift stages in the circus. Poets composed elegies for lost legions beneath the gaze of Juno's statue. Workshops produced amulets shaped like boars and wolves, talismans of strength worn by soldiers as they marched south. Mint masters struck silver denarii stamped with victory's winged form, each coin turning civic aspiration into tangible promise. When Publius Cornelius Scipio Africanus finally carried the fight to Africa in 204 BC, the Republic's educational fabric had matured. Scipio, mentored by Fabius's cautious wisdom and his father's martial ethos, blended Roman stoicism with Hellenistic strategy learned in Greek academies. At the river Great Plains in 203 BC, his troops navigated shifting dunes, studied Carthaginian camp layouts, and struck at dawn's first light. Catapults and ballistae, Roman innovations, tore down enemy fortifications, clearing paths for infantry to rout Hannibal's homeland legions. If a single general could shift the war's theater across the sea, how would Rome's triumph echo through future ages? The Battle of Zama, 202 BC, sealed Rome's victory. Elephant tusks blunted against spear rings. Roman maniples wheeled to flank. Scipio's cavalry crushed Carthaginian horse under Pharsalian dust. Hannibal, once Italy's terror, retreated beneath African sun, his army broken, but spirit unbowed. In the proconsular office, Scipio dedicated victory spoils in Jupiter's temple, and Rome exhaled a collective triumph that humbled a rival power. As peace treaties imposed war indemnities and Carthage's navy shrank to mere coastal patrols, Rome's economy rebounded. Grain from Sicily filled granaries. Veterans settled in colonies stretching into Hispania's valleys. Education pivoted from wartime lessons to civic administration. Law schools trained jurists in universal principles. Architecture students measured columns and corbels destined for aqueducts and basilicas. Workshops cast bronze capitals for temple porticos, and mosaicists assembled tesserae into market scene murals that celebrated the Republic's new geopolitical reach. From Messina's shores to Zama's plains, the Punic Wars carved Rome's destiny in sweat, strategy, and steel. Yet shadows of empire would yet stretch across ever wider seas. Prepare now to leave Carthage's humbled walls and sail toward new horizons of governance and grandeur. In our next chapter, we delve into the Republic's final tumult, social strife, reformers' dreams, and the rise of singular men who would reshape Rome itself. Imagine the Forum of Rome transformed into a battlefield of words and steel, its marble columns trembling under the weight of rival orators' cries. Could a republic forged in shared rule endure ambition's relentless surge? In the golden light of a burning afternoon in 133 BC, Rome's cobbled streets thrummed with restless crowds. Markets stuttered to silence as citizens gathered before the rostra to hear Gaius Gracchus, tribune of the plebs, propose sweeping reforms to rescue the Republic from widening inequality. He spoke of eking out land parcels from vast estates, of subsidized grain distributions to ease the hunger of urban masses. His voice, both urgent and measured, carried across the forum. Let Rome's greatness be measured not in conquests, but in justice for her people. Murmurs rippled through patrician spectators, eyes narrowing against the glare, while plebeians leaned forward, hope flickering in their hearts like torchlight on stone. Behind Gaius, the Basilica Sempronia's shadow stretched over makeshift wooden platforms where scribes hurriedly recorded every word on wax tablets. Their ink-stained fingers risked smudging the rhetoric that would shape a generation's memory. On nearby benches, veteran legionaries, back from campaigns in Hispania and Gaul, exchanged wary glances. They bore scars from distant fields, their loyalty to Rome unquestioned, yet many now found their farms seized to settle debts and repair war coffers. Legionary pensions remained unpaid, their children clamored for bread. Gaius's promise to enfranchise Italy's Latin allies and restore confiscated lands struck a chord that echoed through every social stratum. While Gracchus rallied the masses, the Senate convened in dusky chambers of frescoed walls. Patrician elders debated in low voices. Some hailed the reforms as necessary bulwarks against social collapse. Others branded them demagoguery, threatening Rome's traditions. Silver-haired pontiffs studied augury signs in flickering torchlight, searching for divine approval or warning in each ripple of sacred chicken's feed. When an omen proved unfavorable, a sudden squall scattering scrolls, they postponed key votes, sending ambassadors to placate placid gods with buttered cakes and libations at Jupiter's temple. Across the Tiber, in the shadow of aging temples, Roman women gathered in inner courtyards, their looms clacking as they spun cloth dyed in ochre and madder. They whispered of Gaius's bold gambit, of senators poised to crush any who challenged their hereditary privileges. Mothers fretted over their sons, clients who toiled in vineyards or fought in legions, wondering if the Republic's promised justice would ever touch their doorsteps. Children chased geese along narrow alleys, oblivious to the political earthquake rumbling beneath their parents' feet. The tension broke when a clash erupted between Gracchus's supporters and hired thugs. Wooden benches flew as iron-tipped staffs whirled. Senators' togas stained crimson on the forum's travertine stones. Gaius, shaken but unbowed, ordered his men to stand fast. "Our cause is righteous. Let no fear divide us." Yet fear did spread. In the chaos, dissidents were clubbed, their wax tablets shattered. Echoes of grief and fury swelled until men of both orders spilled into side streets, where villas and insulae, the tenement blocks of the poor, braced for the night's violence. Weeks later, the Republic exhaled a collective gasp when Gaius himself fell victim to a senatorial purge. His body was cast into the Tiber, a grim testament to power's swift reversal. Yet his reformist flame refused to die. Statues commissioned in far-flung colonies, Massalia in Gaul, Neapolis in Magna Graecia, bore his likeness, garlanded in bronze, reminding citizens and exiles alike that justice deferred could ignite anew. If a single tribune's dream could unsettle centuries of tradition, what tempests would rage when generals sought not only victory, but supreme command? The Republic's next trials unfolded in patterns both familiar and unprecedented. Gaius Marius, twice consul and victor over North African tribes, professionalized the legions in 107 BC. He recruited the landless, promising spoils and plots, transforming citizen militias into a standing army of seasoned veterans. Camps, castra, sprouted along the Rhine and Danube, ringed by wooden palisades and ditches. Each unit drilled in precise formations, maneuvering under baton commands until the hoplite phalanx gave way to the more flexible manipular system. Marius's innovations won victories, but also forged personal loyalties. Soldiers swore oaths to their general, not to the Senate, shifting the power balance toward the battlefield. With power came conflict. In 88 BC, Marius's rival, Lucius Cornelius Sulla, marched on Rome itself, the first time a Roman army crossed the sacred boundary of the Pomerium. Legionaries, once humble yeomen, now stormed the streets under senatorial banners unfurled by Sulla's legates. The roaring of marching boots drowned the nightly ululations of Vesta's temple. Citizens barred doors, merchants abandoned stalls. The cry of "Sic semper tyrannus" mingled with the clash of steel on shield. Sulla, seizing dictatorial powers, unleashed proscriptions, blacklists of enemies, from patrician elites to rising equestrian politicians. Public notices nailed to temple doors listed names deemed outlaws. Their properties were auctioned, their families scattered. In the forum's open space, candles burned at empty benches, memorializing those not permitted a proper burial. Sulla claimed divine sanction, pointing to auspicious lightning at the Capitoline summit. Yet smoke and sorrow clouded Rome's skies, leaving an indelible mark on its collective memory. When Sulla departed Italy for the east, leaving power structures shaken, the Republic staggered but endured. The sons of proscribed families pocketed amnesty, forging quiet alliances in Latium's olive groves. Young Cicero, a burgeoning orator, studied law in expanded porticos, taking notes on Sulla's trial proceedings and later declaiming against tyranny in silver-tongued speeches. In libraries at Arpinum, dusty scrolls recorded the proscription's brutality alongside tales of Cumae's Sibyl and Scipio's African campaigns, juxtaposing Rome's mythic past against its brutal present. As the Republic struggled to reclaim its balance, the first triumvirate emerged in 60 BC, Julius Caesar, Marcus Licinius Crassus, and Pompey the Great. Their alliance fused military triumph, vast wealth, and senatorial lineage into a private coalition that eclipsed traditional assemblies. Pompey's return from triumphant eastern campaigns saw him granted land allotments for veterans, while Crassus leveraged his fortunes in silver mines to fund public games. In forum excavations, marble charioteer statues, erected at private expense, danced across pedestals draped in festive cloth. Meanwhile, Caesar pursued conquest in Gaul, his legions carving camps into Gallic fields, constructing bridges over the Rhine faster than senators could debate their legality. Reports of new tribal alliances, Belgae warriors under white-painted shields, galvanized Roman imaginations. Wealth flowed back in ship hulls full of amber, furs, and jars of wild honey. Educated Gauls, curious about Roman customs, sent envoys to study law schools in Rome, learning the 12 tables by torchlight. Tutors lingering in the city's atria taught Latin to Celtic students as they memorized speeches from Cicero's earlier promises of reform. Yet ambition's undertow grew stronger. When Crassus fell and Parthia and Pompey aligned with the Senate against Caesar's populist tilt, the fragile balance cracked. In 49 BC, Caesar crossed the Rubicon, uttering "Alea iacta est," the die is cast, transforming the Tiber's banks into dividing lines between loyalty and rebellion. Murmurs of civil war swelled into clamor as legions marched through the Campus Martius, trumpets blaring beneath Palatine terraces. Senators fled to Capua, citizens barricaded themselves in insulae. The Republic's centuries-old framework teetered as marble idols toppled in street riots. Throughout these decades of triumph and turmoil, Rome's cultural heartbeat persisted. Despite violence, artisans carved new columns depicting Gracchi's martyrdom. Playwrights staged tragedies on the theater of Marcellus's wooden stage. Poets wove elegies that lamented both victory and loss. Private patrons funded frescoes celebrating civic heroes. Public baths echoed with discussions of Stoic philosophy and Epicurean ethics. Temple stones, stained by fire and blood, still bore inscriptions promising divine favor to those who upheld law and piety. Now, as the Republic's final embers flicker beneath the weight of ambition, we stand at history's threshold. The clash of titans, Caesar against Pompey, will decide whether Rome remains a republic of shared rule or transforms into an empire under a single hand. When oaths bow to ambition and citizen soldiers march on their own city, does the dream of shared rule survive, or does empire demand a sole architect? Prepare to witness the Republic's last breath and the dawn of a new order as we turn to the story of Julius Caesar, his rise, his Ides, and the birth of empire. Imagine the Forum's marble shadows lengthening under a blood-red sky as senators whisper of a consul's ambition. Could one man's rise deliver Rome's final blow to the Republic? In 60 BC, an uneasy calm draped over Rome. Pompey returned from the east, laurels gleaming like dawn's first light. Crassus bankrolled extravagant games in the Circus Maximus, and Julius Caesar, recent victor in Gaul, marched through Rome's streets with legions at his back. His name fluttered on every lip. Caesar the general, Caesar the consul, Caesar whose leather-clad feet trod where plebeians and patricians alike paused mid-trade to glimpse his crimson cloak. In courtyard atria, tutors rewound wax tablets of his dispatches, Commentarii de Bello Gallico, and pupils traced Latin syntax with quills, absorbing lessons in strategy as they might memorize geometry. Across the Tiber's gentle currents, artisans labored to reflect this new hero. Mosaicists assembled tesserae into floor-spanning battle scenes. Roman legionaries wading Gaul's rivers, shields locked in iron resolve. Stonemasons carved reliefs above basilica doorways, depicting Caesar's crossing of the Rhine and bridge-building feats that defied belief. Patrons stamped bronze coins with his portrait, laureate and serene, transforming everyday currency into whispered propaganda. Each clink in the Forum's coin racks carried his echo. Daily life pulsed with spectacle and unease. At dawn, the Pontifex Maximus offered prayers at Jupiter's temple, peering for lightning bolts or bird flight patterns to foretell the day's fortunes. Farmers loaded carts of ripe olives and tightly woven grain sacks at dawn markets. By midday, aediles inspected stalls for fair measures and purged any who sold spoiled wares. Meanwhile, children chased geese under shaded colonnades, their laughter an innocent counterpoint to distant drumbeats of marching cohorts. Festivals, celebrating Ceres' bounty or Apollo's healing light, painted the streets in fragrant blooms and lyre melodies, offering brief respite from political storms. Religion and politics entwined more tightly than ever. Before every campaign, Caesar consulted the augurs, interpreting bird calls and liver-examined omens for divine sanction. To curry celestial favor, he funded a lavish restoration of the Temple of Venus Genitrix, his claimed ancestor, draping its columns with new marble and dedicating captured war trophies to the goddess. Vestal virgins burned saffron-scented incense at Vesta's hearth before dawn. Flamens trimmed laurel crowns for triumphal parades. Each ritual reinforced Caesar's image as Rome's favored child. When the Senate issued the ultimatum, lay down your command or be branded a traitor, Caesar halted at the Rubicon's shallow crossing. His legate delivered the order amid hushed oaths. The die is cast. His army, loyal not to Rome alone but to him personally, obeyed. Oars dipped in cold water and legions marched south, each footstep a challenge to centuries of republican tradition. Citizens stood on bridges, stunned, as standards fluttered under leaden clouds, the air thick with dread and anticipation. The first clash at Pharsalus in 48 BC tested both will and blood. Under a blazing sun, Pompey's cavalry, gleaming helmets flashing, charged Caesar's lines. Spears entangled like living vines, shields clanged in iron concert. Yet Caesar's veterans, drilled by endless campaigns, held their ground. Hidden reserves, signaled by muted trumpet calls, wheeled through dust and smoke to strike Pompey's flanks. Horses reared, standards fell, and once proud legions dissolved into panicked flight. Caesar rode among them, sword raised under a sky streaked with red, and at dusk the field lay littered with broken shields and dying cries. His triumphal entry into Rome was a procession of captured generals, their hands bound, while poets composed epic couplets to honor his name. If a single general's tread could shake Rome's very heart, what price would the Republic pay for peace under his rule? In peace's wake, Caesar assumed unprecedented powers. Dictator for 10 years, then perpetual dictator. He embarked on sweeping reforms. Grain distributions doubled to feed the city's hungry masses. Veterans received land parcels in Spain, Syria, and North Africa, each plot consecrated in morning prayers to Ceres. The calendar itself yielded to his hand. The Julian reform aligned civic days with solar seasons, adding leap years to correct the drift. Scholars measured the year by solstice shadows, scribing new festival dates into public edicts. Public works surged under his watch. The Forum Julium, built over silted canals, rose with white travertine colonnades stretching farther than any Senate house. A new basilica offered shelter to legal advocates. An expanded Curia Julia hosted senatorial sessions by flickering lamps. Aqueduct branches snaked through city blocks, carrying mountain spring water into fountains where children played and artisans washed clay pots. Workshops churned out embossed bronze plaques for the new temple of Mars Ultor, proclaiming vengeance against Caesar's enemies. Cultural life blossomed amid these changes. Poets such as Catullus and Lucretius enjoyed patronage in Caesar's salons, reciting verses beneath frescoed ceilings. Philosophers from Athens lectured on Stoicism and Epicureanism in shaded porticos. Their debates lamented the death of republican virtue even as they praised Caesar's clemency. Public libraries, once rare, opened new wings to house papyrus scrolls of Greek tragedies and Roman histories. Children of wealthy parents learned geometry from Greek tutors, studied law under jurists, and practiced oratory in miniature forums carved into atrium walls. Yet the Republic's foundations trembled beneath the weight of singular power. Senators chafed at the loss of collective governance. Whispers of assassination swirled through Venice blue nights. On the Ides of March 44 BC, a conspiracy, led by Cassius and Brutus, assembled in the Senate House. Blades concealed beneath togas glinted in torchlight. As Caesar arrived, crownless and unarmed, conspirators hemmed him in. His eyes flickered with shock at the first blow. Beauty contests of steel and betrayal ensued. When the final dagger found his heart, his blood spattered across marble floors as though painting the Senate's ultimate verdict. When blades fall in the Republic's heart, does shared rule survive in memory, or does empire rise from its ruin? The aftermath was chaos wrapped in mourning. Antony's funeral oration poured grief into the crowds, his voice cracking in the forum's echoing arches. Octavian, adopted heir at 19, arrived to claim his great-uncle's name and legacy. The Republic had breathed its last under Caesar's fall. From its ashes emerged a new order, imperators and emperors, praetorian guards, and imperial cults. Now, as Rome stands at the threshold of an empire, we prepare to follow Octavian's path from heir to Augustus and witness how one man's vision would sculpt a world that would endure for centuries. Picture a lone figure emerging at dawn on the Palatine Hill, his toga catching the first rosy light. Could this young heir reshape Rome's destiny and forge an empire that would outlast the ages? The streets of Rome still bore the wounds of civil strife when Octavian arrived in 44 BC. Marble porticos were stained with dust from fleeing senators. Tribunes whispered in shadowed basilicas about rival factions scrambling for power. Into this fractured world stepped Gaius Octavius Thurinus, 19 years old, nephew and adopted son of Julius Caesar, draped not in purple but in plain white, projecting humility even as rumor called him Divi Filius, son of the divine. He first walked among Caesar's veterans, their hardened faces recalling Gaul's icy rivers and Parthia's desert sands. In pale morning mist, Octavian stood before their ranks, offering not a sword, but a promise: grain rations to fill empty granaries, plots of fertile land to rebuild ravaged farms. His voice rang out clear across the cadence of armor and helmet crest, each word binding soldier and citizen in a new covenant. Veterans clasped his hand, their loyalty forged not by blood, but by hope renewed. Surveyors and architects soon mapped his return. Along the Via Sacra, stonemasons erected temporary shrines to Venus Genetrix, Caesar's claimed ancestor, and to Vesta, the hearth goddess whose eternal flame symbolized Rome's unity. Workshops hummed with hammer and chisel. Relief carvings depicted Octavian calming warring crowds in the Forum, bridging disputes between senators and tribunes with gestures of measured grace. Bronze coins, fresh from mint workshops, bore his youthful visage, laureate brow, and serene gaze, transforming every transaction into subtle heraldry. Within the city's still fragile political architecture, Octavian demonstrated uncanny deftness. He offered clemency to former opponents, pardoning many under Antony's prescriptions while granting them pensions to rebuild homes. In return, senators, once plotting his downfall, found themselves seated beside him in the Curia Julia, discussing restitution measures and municipal reforms. Under flickering torchlight, pontiffs delivered omens in favor of his rule. Chickens devoured offerings with eager beaks at the temple of Jupiter. A sudden breeze carried laurel leaves across the Senate floor, red as divine approbation. Amid these maneuvers, the young leader cultivated Rome's future minds. He established papyrus libraries in the Atrium Libertatis, where fifth-grade children practiced chariot track calculations and read Homeric verses under Greek tutors. Schools, once the preserve of wealthy patricians, opened small alcoves in public porticos, teaching mathematics to freedmen's sons. Under a canopy of grapevines shading the Porticus Livia, lectures on Stoic philosophy encouraged virtue in governance. Rule well, they preached, for your power must serve Rome's enduring greatness. When Antony sailed east in pursuit of Cleopatra, Octavian remained in Italy, championing civic restoration. He commissioned public works on a scale unmatched since the Republic's golden days. The Cloaca Maxima was extended to drain new city districts. Aqueduct channels brought spring water to affluent neighborhoods and public fountains alike. Granaries rose behind the Forum to store surplus harvests for hard seasons. Aedulas supervised road paving with volcanic stone, easing travel for merchants from Hispania's olive groves and Syria's spice caravans. Each project employed thousands of laborers, channeling post-war unemployment into Rome's transformation. The decisive moment arrived in 31 BC at the promontory of Actium. As dawn's rose tinted the Ionian Sea, fleets gleamed in formation. Antony's triremes, gilded for Cleopatra's court, contrasted with Agrippa's quinqueremes, sturdy, disciplined, manned by oarsmen sworn to Octavian's banner. Catapults hurled flaming bolts that carved firebrands across dawn's sky. Ballistae launched iron bolts with thunderous force. When Cleopatra's flagship drifted away under full sail, Antony's heart wavered. Agrippa seized the breach, forcing a retreat that left enemy decks aflame. Shorelines echoed with the cries of hundreds of captured seamen. Huddled survivors surrendered beneath the flags of victory. Returning to Rome, Octavian orchestrated a peace unlike any before. Instead of purges, he offered clemency to former foes. Cities that had backed Antony received amnesty and grain shipments. The Senate, anxious to restore stability, granted him sweeping powers: Imperium Maius, supreme command over every province, and Tribunicia Potestas, tribunician authority charged with safeguarding citizens' rights. In 27 BC, he ceremonially surrendered 3/4 of his powers, only to see the Senate unanimously restore them with the honored title Augustus, the revered one, and the lifelong dignity of Princeps Civitatis, first citizen of the state. Augustus's era ushered in a golden age of art and architecture. The Ara Paxis Augusti, Altar of Peace, rose on Campus Martius, its marble friezes entwining mythic Aeneas's sacrifice with images of contemporary Vestal virgins and Augustus's own religious piety. The Forum of Augustus, fronted by Corinthian columns over 40 feet high, housed statues of Aeneas and Romulus, merging legend and rule in stone. Poets Virgil, Horace, and Ovid found patronage in his court, their verses binding Rome's destiny to Troy's epic narrative and to the values of pietas, devotion to gods and ancestors. Education continued its expansion under imperial patronage. The Museum Augusti, a precursor to a public library, housed scrolls of Greek philosophy and Roman law. Grammar schools taught meter and rhetoric, preparing youth for roles in provincial administration. Engineering schools near the Aqua Claudia and Anio Novus taught hydraulics and arch construction, training the next generation of aqueduct engineers and road surveyors. These institutions blurred class lines, admitting promising students from equestrian and freedman backgrounds alongside patrician sons. Religion and civic life intertwined more tightly than ever. Augustus revived ancient rituals. He closed the Temple of Janus's doors, symbolizing the longed-for peace he had secured. He re-established the Collegium Pontificum and reinvigorated the Sali priests, whose ritual dances reaffirmed Mars's protection. He instituted games in honor of Apollo on the Palatine, funded by his private coffers, ensuring his popularity among both plebeians and elites. In every province, governors erected altars to the emperor's genius, weaving loyalty to Augustus into local cults and everyday worship. As Augustus aged, he guided the succession with care. He adopted Tiberius, son of his wife Livia, ensuring continuity. In AD 14, amid sobs in the Forum's marble galleries, Augustus passed away, his final verdict echoing, "I found Rome a city of brick and leave it a city of marble." His legacy endured in the 2 centuries of Pax Romana, in which roads stretched 15,000 miles, in which peace enabled commerce, art, and the rule of law to flourish from Britannia's fog to Arabia's sands. If a single soul could stand beneath Palatine dawn and reshape a battered republic into a stable empire, what echoes of his vision still resonate through Rome's marbled avenues? Now, as we drift beyond the age of Augustus into the empire's heart, we prepare to witness how Pax Romana nurtured cultural brilliance, administrative innovation, and the enduring structures that would outlast kingdoms. Imagine Rome's heartbeat slowing to the measured drum of distant legions, its marbled forums humming not with conflict, but with peace. Could a single era of stability outshine centuries of war and forge an unbroken legacy? Envision first light creeping over the Palatine, gilding the Arapacis in soft rose and gold. Under Augustus's watch, 2 centuries of calm unfurled like a polished scroll, binding provinces from the misty hills of Britannia to the sunburnt sands of Egypt. Gladiators and generals gave way to magistrates and merchants, and the roar of battle was replaced by the steady hum of commerce. Along the great roads, Via Appia, Via Flaminia, and their countless tributaries, Caravans rolled southward with amphorae of olive oil from Hispania, northern wine pressed under Atlantic skies, and rare silks from distant Sogdiana. Mules tucked under heavy packs clopped through taverns that offered warm bread, goat cheese, and local olives for hungry travelers. Milestones carved with imperial inscriptions and the emperor's name marked each league of progress, reminding wayfarers that they traversed Pax Romana's iron veins. Meanwhile, the Mediterranean itself became a Roman lake. Grain ships glided from Alexandria's docks under white sails, heavy with Egypt's harvest. They passed ruby-trimmed triremes that patrolled silent waters, ensuring pirates dared not disturb the peace. Docks in Ostia and Puteoli teemed with activity at dawn. Stevedores flung bundles of barley onto waiting carts, fishmongers hawked salted anchovies, and customs officials stamped cargoes with official seals, their bronze weights clinking in the morning air. Far from the capital, provincial towns flourished under Roman law. In Gaul, Lugdunum's amphitheater hosted festivals honoring Rome's gods and local deities, woven into the imperial pantheon. Merchants from the Rhine sold Noric steel tools, while potters displayed terra sigillata bowls stamped with legionary symbols. Lawyers, draped in white-hemmed togas, argued property disputes and marriage contracts in basilicas built of pale limestone. Citizens of diverse backgrounds, freeborn and freedmen, stood equal before the scales of justice, confident in codified statutes that guaranteed fair hearings. If swords sank into sheaths and stones were laid in peace, how would Roman ingenuity flourish without the crucible of war? Engineering marvels rose to meet civic need. The Aqua Claudia and Anio Novus aqueducts, channeled through vaulted tunnels and cradled on towering arches, brought fresh spring water from distant hills into Rome's fountains and baths. In each fountain, water spilled over marble lips into basins where children laughed and artisans washed pigments from their brushes. Public baths, those great palaces of leisure, sprang from Augustus's reforms and expanded under Trajan and Hadrian. The baths of Caracalla sprawled across 20 hectares, hot caldaria scented with pine resin, warm tepidaria gilded with mosaics, and cool frigidaria where robes were cast aside. Beneath the floors, hypocaust systems shunted heated air through brick pillars, warming caldaria like a subterranean hearth. Social life bloomed within these communal spaces. Senators in their pristine tunics reclined on marble benches to debate politics between steaming pools. Freedmen shared benches with veteran centurions, swapping tales of distant campaigns for gossip about senatorial intrigue. Philosophers set up porticos where they lectured on Stoic virtue and Epicurean moderation, quoting Cicero and Epictetus as patrons sipped spiced wine. Even children found delight in swimming schools held in shallow plunge pools beneath frescoed ceilings depicting sea nymphs and tritons. Culture itself matured under imperial patronage. Virgil and Horace penned lines that entwined Rome's founding myths with Augustus's rule, their verses recited at family hearths and public readings alike. Ovid experimented with meter in elegies exploring love and exile. His manuscripts circulated in private libraries and among scribes copying scrolls in distant Antioch. Trajan's Forum boasted a library wing where Greek and Latin scrolls lay side by side under bronze lamps. Educated women, often relegated to private spheres, gathered in elegant atria to study grammar and philosophy, commissioning scribes to inscribe pages for their growing collections. Artisans perfected techniques in mosaic and marble carving. Provincial workshops in Gaeta turned out floor mosaics depicting wildlife and mythic scenes, each tessera a jewel in the villa's polished expanse. In Rome, stonemasons sculpted portraits of ancestors and deities for the Forum's triumphal arches. Portraiture reached new heights of realism under Hadrian, whose beard and calm expression signaled a philosophical ruler. Busts of Antoninus Pius captured the emperor's contemplative gaze, while reliefs on Marcus Aurelius's column in Trajan's Forum immortalized barbarians defeated, yet honored for their courage. Agriculture thrived under secure borders. Latifundia estates dotted Campania's fertile plains, worked by tenant farmers who paid rent in grain and wine. New farming tools, iron plowshares and scythes, streamed from northern workshops, boosting yields in Gaul and Hispania. Olive presses in Baetica churned out oil that found its way into every Roman kitchen and temple ritual. Wine amphorae flew from Gaul's vineyards to Britain's taverns, their corks sealed with wax stamped by vintners' families, ensuring quality in distant markets. Trade routes extended far beyond the Mediterranean. Caravans crossed mountain passes into Persia, carrying precious silks and spices for Rome's elite banquets. From Britannia's tin mines to Dacia's gold panners, resource flows enriched imperial coffers and fueled construction projects. Customs stations, porteria, collected tariffs in bustling marketplaces where merchants from diverse cultures exchanged not only goods, but languages, rituals, and stories. Yet even amid unprecedented calm, tensions simmered at the edges of empire. Legions garrisoned frontier walls, Hadrian's Wall across Britain's northern highlands, the Limes Germanicus along the Rhine, awaiting tides of migration and occasional raids by Germanic tribes. Soldiers drilled under gray skies, their centurions barking commands as testudo formations wove shields into living ramparts. Provincial governors negotiated treaties with tribal kings, offering foederati status to warriors willing to serve Rome, a compromise that blended military might with diplomatic acumen. Within the capital, elite circles debated the empire's future. Sucurtians, former allies of Antony, found roles in provincial administration, while noble families vied for priesthoods in the College of Pontiffs and Sali priests honored Mars in martial dances. Senators sponsored public games, funding chariot races and theatrical performances that reaffirmed civic identity. Feasts at wealthy villas overflowed with peacock brains and dormice dipped in honey, yet philosophers warned against decadence, urging moderation and virtue in letters read under candlelight. As the era culminated under Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor faced internal and external challenges with stoic resolve. Plague swept through provinces, sapping labor forces and testing medical knowledge. Germanic incursions pressed into Gaul, and Marcus personally led legions along the Danube's misty banks, his captain's staff in hand. He penned meditations on campaign marches, reflections on fate, duty, and the fleeting nature of power. Even as he battled disease abroad, he maintained civic projects at home, rebuilding aqueduct channels and restoring damaged walls, ensuring that Rome's physical and moral fabric remained strong. If fraternity and law could underwrite 2 centuries of calm, what undercurrents would one day unravel this grand tapestry? By the mid-3rd century A.D., pressures, economic imbalance, succession crises, and renewed barbarian migrations began to fray Pax Romana's threads. Yet the achievements of that golden age endured: roads that connected continents, laws that bound diverse peoples, and cultural treasures that inspired generations. The memory of peace's promise, carved in marble and etched in scrolls, would guide later rulers as they strove to restore unity amid new storms. Now, as shadows lengthen on Rome's horizon, we turn to explore the crucible of crisis and Constantine's rebirth, where empire's sunlight gives way to dusk and then dawn once more. Imagine the empire's vast expanse under a gathering storm of turmoil, its legions stretched thin across distant frontiers. Could Rome's steel resolve survive the fractures of power, plague, and restless tribes? By the middle of the 3rd century A.D., an era of calm gave way to crises that tested every fiber of Roman strength. On the Danube frontier, Germanic warbands pressed against border forts, their warriors' war cries echoing across the fog-shrouded limes. In the east, the Sassanid Persians under King Shapur seized Roman provinces, their cavalry sweeping through shattered legions and setting fire to outposts once deemed unassailable. News carried by reed-sheathed couriers reached Rome as rumors of decimated cohorts and pillaged towns, each dispatch staining the Senate's marbled walls with dread. Within Rome, the fabric of society stretched perilously. Emperors rose and fell in rapid succession, often by dagger or battlefield. Barracks emperors, soldiers proclaimed Augustus by acclamation of the legions, held power for mere months before rivals slew them in palace intrigue. Inflation roared as silver coinage was diluted. The price of grain soared beyond the reach of common citizens, forcing mothers to barter jewelry for wheat. Public order frayed. Bandits preyed on travel routes once patrolled by disciplined cohorts, and city gangs carved territories in insular neighborhoods, their turf marked by spray-painted emblems and nightly clashes beneath torchlight. Amid this maelstrom, one man's vision emerged to guide the empire from darkness. Gaius Flavius Valerius Aurelius Constantinus, later called Constantine, climbed the ranks in the turbulent years after Diocletian's tetrarchy. He witnessed civil war's horrors firsthand: burning villas, executed rivals, and provinces torn between competing claimants. In 312 AD, as he prepared to face Maxentius's forces at the Milvian Bridge, legend held that a cross of light appeared in the sky above him, accompanied by the Latin inscription "In hoc signo vinces." "In this sign you will conquer." That night, Constantine dreamed of a radiant Christ, instructing him to mark his soldiers' shields with the Chi-Rho. At dawn, his legions advanced with crosses painted upon their scuta. Riveted by newfound faith and imperial promise, they clashed with Maxentius's troops on the bridge's narrow causeway. Shields locked, swords clanged, and oaths rang out amidst the Tiber's swirling waters below. Constantine's standard, Chi-Rho against a field of crimson, gleamed in the morning sun as his cavalry flanked the enemy. Panic rippled through Maxentius's ranks, and many plunged into the river, swept away by the current. Victory was absolute. Maxentius's body was lost to the waters, and Constantine rode triumphantly into Rome, his faith sealed by blood and bridge. He issued the Edict of Milan in 313 AD, proclaiming religious tolerance throughout the empire. No longer would pagans alone light sacrifices at Jupiter's altars. Christians could worship openly, restore confiscated property, and erect basilicas where once only shrines to the old gods stood. On Athens's shores and Antioch's bustling quays, new churches rose in brick and marble, sanctuaries for congregations once forced into catacombs beneath city streets. Liturgies chanted in the half-light of oil lamps offered Latin hymns that blended Eastern chants, a harmonious fusion echoing the empire's cultural breadth. Constantine embarked on transforming the very seat of power. In 324 AD, he selected a site on the Bosporus's shimmering waters to found Nova Roma, New Rome, soon called Constantinople. Surveyors leveled land once dominated by palaces and hippodrome spina, and architects laid grand avenues lined with tetrapylons and triumphal arches. Aqueducts sourced water from distant hills, feeding fountains in the great hippodrome and baths bedecked in porphyry and gold leaf. Masons carved massive walls punctuated by towers, ensuring the new capital could withstand sieges that had once hobbled Rome itself. Administrative reforms under Constantine further solidified imperial cohesion. He expanded the bureaucracy, separating civil and military commands to prevent provincial generals from usurping power. Diocletian's dioceses were reorganized, grouped under praetorian prefects whose sworn duty was to enforce taxation fairly and quell revolts swiftly. Tax collectors, rescriptors, maintained meticulous ledgers in public record offices, their inked scrolls ensuring state revenue from grain tithe, portoria tolls, and land surveys flowed into imperial coffers. Economic adjustments sought to curb inflation. Constantine reissued a new gold coin, the solidus, minted to exacting purity and weight. It became the empire's stable currency, accepted from Londinium's docks to Cairo's bazaars. Merchants no longer hesitated to price goods in solidi, and soldiers received their wages in reliable gold. Wealthy patrons adorned basilicas and built hospitals, xenodochia, for the poor and pilgrims, their donations commemorated in dedicatory inscriptions carved above grand portals. Cultural life in Constantine's age blended old traditions and new faith. Pagan festivals continued in reduced forms. The Saturnalia became a week of civic gift-giving, later echoed in Christian almsgiving at Epiphany. Meanwhile, ecclesiastical councils shaped doctrine. Bishops from the farthest provinces gathered at Nicaea in 325 A.D. to debate Christ's nature, forging a creed that would guide worship across centuries. Deacons read Scripture in ornate basilicas, their voices rising beneath coffered ceilings painted with biblical scenes. Education adapted to this transformation. Christian schools, scholae, sprouted alongside secular grammar schools. Students learned Latin grammar and Scripture in tandem, memorizing Psalms as others learned Virgil's verses. Scriptoriums in major cities preserved classical texts even as copyists produced volumes of sermons by Athanasius and Augustine. Libraries, once the domain of elite patrician families, opened reading rooms for clergy and scholars, their scrolls kept under lock and eagle-cresset security. Yet challenges remained. In the West, military commanders like Victorinus and Constantine's son Constans struggled to repel Gothic invasions. Frontier legions, reduced by plague and stretched across vast distances, could not always muster in time. Towns like Trier and Mediolanum fortified their walls, using veteran legions as local garrisons. Citizens drafted defenses in hastily dug ditches. Women and children learned to haul water for boiling cauldrons that would bake bricks for makeshift ramparts. Religious tensions flared despite imperial tolerance. Arianism, questioning Christ's divinity, divided congregations. Councils at Arles and Sardica tried to reconcile factions. Bishops exiled under rival emperors returned under Constantine's successors, their sees restored, but doctrinal unity still fragile. Pagan cults persisted in rural sanctuaries, and Constantine's own son Crispus secretly sponsored secret rituals until his fall from favor. By the time Constantine died in 337 A.D., the empire had been refashioned, politically, religiously, and culturally, ensuring its survival for centuries more. Though crises would return, the reforms of Constantine's reign provided a blueprint for unity. A Christianized state under a single ruler, stable currency, fortified capitals, and a bureaucracy capable of collecting taxes and enforcing law. If Rome could be reborn in a distant city and guided by faith as much as force, what will future emperors build on this legacy of crisis overcome? As Constantine's dawn yields to the flickering twilight of late antiquity, we prepare to explore how barbarians carved kingdoms from empire's fringes and how the eastern capital endured long after Rome fell, carrying the imperial torch into a new era. Imagine jagged silhouettes pressing against crumbling walls, shields raised against the sky. Could Rome's storied glory survive these shadows at her gates? By the late 4th century, the empire's heartbeat faltered beneath the weight of centuries. Once secure frontiers now bristled with restless peoples, Goths driven by Hunnic upheavals, Vandals seeking fertile lands, Franks spilling across Gaul, and Saxons probing Britain's shores. Their war cries echoed through abandoned watchtowers and empty camps where veteran cohorts had long since marched west, leaving garrisons undermanned and morale brittle. Inside the fading majesty of the imperial city, civic life strained under economic and social pressures. Silver coinage, once pure, had been repeatedly debased to fund military expeditions. Market stalls groaned beneath rising prices. Wheat that filled bread ovens cost families their savings, and local artisans struggled to procure quality bronze and iron. Landowners, unable to pay taxes, surrendered estates to wealthy magnates who tightened their grip on peasant labor. Tenant farmers, colony, found themselves bound more tightly to the soil, their freedoms curtailed by decrees enforcing hereditary tenancy. If Rome's roads once bore legions and merchants alike, can they still carry refugees fleeing devastation and exile? Across distant provinces, administrative reforms creaked like ancient gates. Theodosius's division of the empire into east and west in AD 395 left separate administrations ill-prepared to coordinate defense. In Milan and Ravenna, Western emperors held court, while barbarian generals, Stilicho, then his successors, wrestled for power. A succession of weak or child emperor figureheads invited intrigue and assassination. Galerius forced Diocletian's son into monastic exile. Honorius fled to Ravenna when Visigoths under Alaric approached Italy's heart. Valentinian's offspring could scarce muster a coherent policy. In the countryside, Gothic foederati, once settled as allies, became predators of the harvest. Local landholders hid behind locked villa gates as raiding bands descended, seizing grain, livestock, and intoxicating honey mead. Villas once alive with the chatter of freedmen turned silent, their mosaics cracking under the boots of marauders. Provincial bishops, Ambrose in Milan, Augustine in Hippo, struggled to minister to displaced flocks, offering sanctuary in basilicas while composing sermons that warned of spiritual decay and urged charity amid chaos. On the Danube limes, watchtowers fell dark one by one. Soldiers paid in worthless coin deserted their posts for the security of fortified towns. Palisades rotted, rivers silting up, swallowed Roman roads. Where once ballistae perched on ramparts, only vultures nested among collapsed parapets. Gothic chieftains, Fritigern, Radagaisus, crossed into Thrace and Italy with ease, their cavalry outflanking decaying legions. In A.D. 378, the Battle of Adrianople saw Emperor Valens himself perish beneath Gothic spears, shattering any illusion of invincibility and emboldening tribes from the Rhineland to the Black Sea. As walls cracked at the edges, corruption gnawed from within. Provincial governors skimmed taxes for personal gain, starving garrisons of supplies. The Annona system, once a marvel of grain distribution, ground to a halt as shipments from Africa and Egypt were seized by pirates or lost to storms. Urban plebs, once comforted by cheap bread and staged circus games, found their entertainment replaced by the clamor of displaced refugees camped in basilicas and forums. Martial spirit hardened into resentment, and mobs occasionally rose to sack distant warehouses, leaving city streets littered with overturned carts and smashed amphorae. Yet the empire did not fall with a single blow. Theodosius the Firn's edict outlawing pagan worship in A.D. 391 marked the closing chapter of Rome's ancestral faith, not with fanfare, but with gradual neglect. Temples of Jupiter and Venus, once lavishly maintained, were stripped of bronze doors, their priests dispersed. Christian basilicas rose among their ruins, and new festivals replaced the old Lupercalia and Saturnalia. Bishops assumed civic duties, mediating disputes, distributing alms, and even negotiating peace with invading chieftains. The empire's soul had shifted from martial virtue to ecclesiastical authority. In A.D. 410, Alaric's Visigoths breached the Aurelian walls and ransacked Rome itself. For the first time in 800 years, the Eternal City felt the thunder of boots in its streets. Looters carried away golden statues and tore silk curtains from patrician windows. Augustine, then Bishop of Hippo, grappled with the theological implications in the city of God, arguing that earthly kingdoms were fleeting and that Rome's true foundation lay in the heavenly city. Yet the sight of once proud forums stripped bare haunted the collective memory of empire, a stark testament to vulnerability. On the western frontier, commanders like Aetius mounted desperate defenses. In Gaul, he rallied federated tribes, Visigoths, Franks, Huns, under Roman banners, defeating Attila at the Catalonian plains in A.D. 451. His skill bought the Western Empire a fleeting reprieve, but upon his assassination in 454, allied contingents drifted back to their homelands or carved independent kingdoms. Provence, Aquitaine, Hispania, and North Africa fell under Visigothic, Vandal, and Suevic rule, each sub-kingdom following a Romanized administrative model, yet operating beyond central control. The final blow came in A.D. 476, when Odoacer, a Germanic dux in Italy, deposed the child emperor Romulus Augustulus. he sent the purple tunic and diadem to the Eastern court in Constantinople, signaling that no mortal on the west bank of the Adriatic would again wear imperial authority. The eastern half, buoyed by wealth and strategic depth, endured for another millennium, but the Western Empire's sun had set. When the eagle's wings can no longer shelter distant peoples, and the Senate's voice has faded into legend, does Rome survive in memory alone, or in new kingdoms built upon its ruins? Though the Western Empire collapsed, its legacy endured in law, language, and infrastructure. Roman roads became Frankish entries, basilicas housed bishops in medieval towns, Latin evolved into Romance tongues, and the notion of res publica persisted in civic charters. The empire in decline left a mosaic of kingdoms: Visigothic Spain, Ostrogothic Italy, Vandal Africa, each tracing governance to Roman models. Now, as the barbarians settle behind the gates once manned by Roman legions, we prepare to trace Rome's final chapter, how memory and myth preserved its spirit through the Middle Ages and beyond. Envision the last glow of a fading sunset, painting shattered walls in shades of ember and ash, the distant echo of once proud standards swallowed by twilight. Could the spirit of a city forged by millennia still blaze when her empire lies in ruin? In those final generations, Rome's heart faded not in a dramatic blaze, but in a slow dimming, a tapestry unraveling stitch by fragile stitch. The great basilicas stood silent beneath moss-stained vaults, their marble floors cracked where families once gathered to hear civic decrees. The markets, once alive before dawn with merchants hawking silk and spices, now offered only local fare. Coarse brown bread made from spelt, sun-dried fish from the Tiber's sluggish waterways, and olives pressed by rustic presses in villas outside the walls. At daybreak, the aqueduct channels gurgled a trickle of water through broken arches. Moss and weeds thrived among the stones where cartwheels once rang with urgency. Small fountains, once ornate sculptures dedicated to nymphs and river gods, dropped feeble streams into chipped basins. Children, their sandals worn to straps, scooped water to drink. Elders whispered prayers of gratitude that at least life still flowed, however weakly. On narrow lanes, the memory of martial parades lingered in the uneven paving stones. Legionary standards, lost to time, were recalled only in sepia-toned fresco fragments discovered under collapsed insulae. Young boys, spinning wooden tops, listened to tales of Caesar's triumphs as though by candlelight, their eyes reflecting the flicker of a dying flame of recollection. Parents spoke of distant provinces where Roman law still held sway: Antioch, Alexandria, Carthage, places where marble colonnades gleamed and scholars debated in porticos. To them, those cities felt like echoes of a homeland no longer under their feet. Behind the city walls, estates once owned by patrician families lay abandoned or consolidated under new Gothic lords. Tenant farmers, colony, toiled under harsh edicts, their freedoms tied irrevocably to the land they plowed. Plague and starvation thinned the population. Family lineages faded as sons failed to return from military service in distant provinces. Villa mosaics of mythic heroes, Achilles' rage, Aeneas' voyage, cracked under neglect, the stories beneath their feet crumbling like dry earth. The Senate House, once the epicenter of debate and decision, echoed with footsteps long after magistrates vanished. Senators who remained, mostly elderly aristocrats spared by successive waves of proscription, met in limp gatherings to sign tax edicts and grain rations, their robes dragging across dusty benches. Their voices trembled as they invoked ancient statutes, hoping that invoking the weight of tradition might still command obedience from provincial governors and tribal chieftains alike. In the countryside beyond the walls, the rhythm of life diverged. Monasteries, those beacons of stability, sprang up on high ground, their whitewashed walls visible for leagues. Monks tended olive groves and vineyards, teaching local peasants pruning methods preserved in manuscripts they copied by hand. Cloister kitchens baked simple loaves for travelers and pilgrims, while scriptorium workshops meticulously copied texts. Augustine's City of God, Cicero's letters, fragments of Ovid's Exiles, all bound together by monkish care. In these sanctuaries the flame of classical learning endured, even as the world beyond teetered. Across provinces once ruled from Rome, new kingdoms emerged, melding Roman administration with tribal custom. In Gaul, the Visigothic court at Toulouse maintained Roman tax registers, their Latin chancellors preserving imperial bureaucracy. In Hispania, Suevic kings minted coins in the Roman style, stamping emperors' faces alongside Gothic symbols of power. Towns fortified themselves with stone walls, yet inside, magistrates continued to hold courts under the mosaic-tiled porticos built by Romano-Hispanic families centuries earlier. Religious life shifted irrevocably. Pagan temples, once the city's glittering crown, were emptied of sacrifice altars and bronze doors hauled away. Their priests faded into obscurity or converted to the ascendant faith. In their stead, towering basilicas dedicated to saints, Peter, Paul, Ambrose, drew crowds for daily mass. Hymns replaced the clang of sacrificial chisels. Incense drifted beneath half-collapsed vaults. Bishops, draped in purple and gold, mediated land disputes and collected tithes, their authority surpassing any magistrate's. The cross, once a clandestine symbol, became the empire's new standard, emblazoned on banners and cast in bronze above every church door. Trade routes transformed into pilgrimage paths. The old Roman roads, pocked and overgrown, guided pilgrims to shrines in Gaul, Spain, and the Holy Land. Inns, once way stations for merchants, offered refuge to wandering ascetics. They carved hostel rooms into former storehouses, hanging icons of the Virgin in corners, once reserved for grains and spices. Along these routes, communities of travelers exchanged tales, of Constantinople's golden domes, of Alexandria's library ruins, of distant lands where Cicero's speeches survived in parchment scrolls. In urban centers, law continued to serve as connective tissue. Municipal councils in Italian towns, Pisa, Florence, Ravenna, invoked Roman charters to assert communal councils. They elected consuls and tribunes in name, if not in function, guarding remnants of res publica against private magnates. Guilds of artisans, bricklayers, weavers, smiths, formed associations reminiscent of guilds known in antiquity as collegia, regulating trade practices and mutual aid. They commissioned public works, road repairs, aqueduct restoration, sometimes paying from their coffers when imperial funds fell short. Security became a patchwork affair. Fortified towns, perched atop hills, relied on hastily trained militias. Castellans, local strongmen, claimed hereditary commands, their towers lit by beacon fires signaling raids from wandering bands. The Huns, pushing tribes westward, collapsed entire provinces, scattering populations and uprooting centuries of settlement patterns. In places, only ruins remained. Distant observers' accounts describe empty amphitheaters and collapsed arches swallowed by bramble. Political authority shifted from the emperor in Constantinople to regional rulers. In Italy, Ostrogothic King Theodoric ruled from Ravenna, preserving Roman taxation and legal codes while hosting symposia in his palace's Grand Hall. His court invited poets and philosophers to recite in Greek and Latin, blending Gothic martial prowess with classical refinement. But after his death, successors lacked his vision, and factional intrigue turned Ravenna's marble corridors into scenes of exile and assassination. In the West, imaginations turned to legend. Stories circulated of Romulus and Remus, of Aeneas's flight from Troy, as if the city's mythical origins could somehow restore its faded glory. Minstrels recited epic verses in village squares beneath torches. Storytellers wove tales of Caesar's ghost, marching through the forum at midnight, a spectral reminder of vanished greatness. Children grew up on such myths, learning to revere Roman names even when the stones that bore them cracked and fell. And yet, even in the empire's final flicker, hope glimmered. Merchants in Byzantine markets bartered Roman luxury silks, smuggled across the Mediterranean at exorbitant prices. Scholars in Constantinople studied Justinian's codex, preparing the legal foundations for future kingdoms. Western bishops corresponded with their Eastern counterparts, preserving theological unity in a time of political fragmentation. The ideal of united Christendom, though unrealized, flickered as a distant aspiration born from Rome's legacy. At last, the Western imperial title passed into legend. The city beneath the Palatine, no longer the seat of power, became a shrine to memory. Pilgrims visited the catacombs and steps where apostles once stood. Merchants claimed descent from Roman veterans. Civic leaders cursed barbarity, yet adopted barbarian shields and local coats of arms. Rome's stones became relics themselves, marble fragments embedded in medieval church walls, columns repurposed as pillars in new basilicas, ensuring that each building echoed ancient grandeur. As our journey through the empire's twilight draws to a close, remember that history's mightiest realms are not extinguished with the last imperial decree, but transformed by the lives and stories they leave behind. Though Rome's political dominion ended, her laws, language, and engineering marvels endured, shaping the course of Europe and the world. Thank you for accompanying this odyssey through Rome's final chapters. If you found resonance in her fall and legacy, please subscribe for more voyages into history's turning tides. Share your thoughts and stories below, and may the echoes of ancient empires inspire your own path ahead. Farewell until our next journey through time's hidden corridors.